Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, my name is Austin. Welcome to my channel. You know, if I could summarize the average person's relationship with money in one single quote, it would be, money comes slowly and leaves quickly. Now, I spent 7 years working in the service industry, and during that time, I was making about $8 an hour. And when you're making so little, you really realize how true that statement is, because I would work 8-hour shifts on my feet, come home exhausted, and at the end of the day, I wasn't even making over $100. Luckily, in that time, I was living at home, so I didn't have that many expenses. But during those 7 years, I learned so many lessons about how to save money on a low income. And I think the main thing that I learned is that we can't always control the money that's coming in, but we do have some control of the money that's leaving. Money comes slowly and leaves quickly. If you're working a low income job, I'm sure you understand how valid that statement is. You know, I can't tell you how to make the money come in quicker, but I can show you how to make the money leave a little bit slower so you can save the money. So in this video, I want to talk about what I learned in those 7 years when I was making a low income and share 11 tips to saving on a low income. But of course, before I begin, I must ask you, every single last one of you out there, to just click the like button, maybe even subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And so let's begin. Tip number 1 is understand how income works. Now, I want to start this off by just explaining a little bit how income works, because when I was in that low income environment, I used to think that income was based on how hard you work, but now I know that is just not true. And I think if you understand how income works and why certain jobs pay more, then you can understand how to make more money. Now, there are thousands of jobs in this world, but when you boil it down, there are really just 2 ways to make money. The first way is through physical labor, where you use your body to make money, like construction. And the second way is through mental labor, where you use your brain to make money, like office work. Now, there's no one job that is better than another, but generally, jobs that require mental labor pay more than jobs that require physical labor. Now, it's important to understand how income works, because it's hard to save a lot of money when you're not making a lot of money. That is just a fact. And there's no job that's better than another, and you're not better if you use your mind to work or your body to work. But generally, that is how income works. You will make more money if you can find ways to use your mind instead of your body to make money. That is just how the world works, and you'll be able to save more money. And the second tip is to connect time with money. Now, saving is a lot easier when you understand that money represents your time. And if you're working a job where you're getting paid a wage or a salary, then your money represents your time, because what you're doing is you're selling your time in exchange for money. You know, back in the day when I was making $8 an hour, I realized that it took me about 10 minutes of my time at work to make one single dollar. So every single time I would spend $1, I would always ask myself the question, is this whatever worth the 10 minutes of time it took to make the money? And most of the time, the answer was no. When you're on a low income, you have to ask yourself this question for every single dollar that you spend, because the less you get paid, then the more time it takes to make that money. And time is money, so don't waste all your money buying dumb stuff, because what you're really doing is you're just throwing away your time. And tip number 3 is understand the difference between a want and a need. Ladies and gentlemen, in this world, there are so many people that do not understand the difference between a want and a need. It's kind of a little actually sad. But I'm going to tell you right now, a need is something that you cannot live without, like food, water, and shelter. A want is something that you can live without, like ice cream and Netflix. It really is this simple. If you want to save money, you just have to understand the difference between a want and a need, and then just cut out all the wants and solely focus on satisfying your needs, and you'll save tons of money. There's nothing wrong with spending money on wants, but if you don't have the money, then there is something wrong with that, because that's what's going to keep you trapped in this low income situation. And tip number 4 is think small. The problem that so many people have with saving money is they're thinking too big. They're thinking of ideas that they can save $100, but people don't bother trying to save one single dollar. But the biggest mistake that you can make when saving money is saying to yourself, it's not that much money, it's just $1. Because the reality is that it's very difficult to save $100, but it's very easy to save $1. Now, I can tell you hundreds of ways to save one single dollar, but I can only say a few ways to save $100. But if you make decisions every single day to cut your expenses by one single dollar, that will add up to thousands of dollars at the end of the year. And if you want to save $1,000 on a low income, you have to look at it as $1,001 decisions, not one $1,000 decision. And tip number 5 is don't spend a lot of money to work. Now, many people don't realize that working isn't actually free, and you can spend a lot of money just on your job through things like commuting or eating out. And if you're on a low income, you could be making a lot less money than you actually think because you're spending so much money to work. For example, if you live 15 miles away from your job and you're making $8 an hour, then 1 hour of your labor is just going to gas. If you choose to eat out instead of bring your food, that could be another hour of your labor going to working. Now, you should not be spending a lot of money to work. And if you're at a low income job that's far away, you could be spending 1/3 of your salary just on things related to work, and you could be making a lot less than you actually think you are. And it might be time to look for a job that's closer to home or just doing something a little bit differently. Now, that is much easier said than done, but if you're spending all this money on working, then that job might not be worth it. And tip number 6 is track all expenses. Now, this is going to be the number one thing that you can do in order to save the most amount of money. You have to track your expenses, because if you don't know where your money is going, then how are you going to save money? So you need to write down every single expense you make down to the penny. Now, there are a lot of apps that do this, but I prefer to just use a simple Excel sheet. So let me show you what I do when I'm tracking my expenses. So this is how I track my expenses. So as you see, I have the date, expense, expense category, and amount. So every single time I make a purchase, for example, rent, then I just put it on this sheet down to the penny. And then off to the side here, I have the different categories so I can find out areas that I am overspending. So for example, this month I spent $92 on drinks. I could cut that entirely out if I wanted to. Or I spent $71 on eating out. Those are all once, and I can cut those out completely. And after a month or so, you can see your habits and where you might be overspending. And then you can do the 7th tip, and that's cut out the easy things first. Now, once you do this for about a month, then you can look at it and see areas that you might be overspending. And it's actually very interesting to see where you're spending your money. Now, there's things that are easy to cut out, like a cup of coffee, and there are things that are a little bit more difficult, like lowering your rent. So let's start off with the easy things first. So if I wanted to save money, I could just cut out all the wants. I could cut out drinks, I could cut out entertainment, I could cut out eating out, and that would save me in my budget almost $200 a month. So the next month, I'm just gonna be a little bit more conscious in those areas of my spending. And when you track it, then you're more conscious because you're physically typing it in whenever you're spending your money. And then you move on to the 8th tip, and that's you lower the more difficult expenses. Now, after you track your expenses, you're gonna notice that majority of your expenses go to 3 things: housing, food, and transportation. And if you can figure out ways to lower these expenses, this is the area that you can save the most amount of money. It's much more difficult than just cutting out a cup of coffee, but these are the areas that you can save the most amount of money. So for example, if you're on a low income, there is no reason that you should have a nice car. You should take it back to the dealership, get a cheap car paid off in a year. If you're in a big apartment, consider downsizing it to save money on rent. And for groceries, I made a whole video about that where you can save money on groceries. It's much more difficult to save money in these areas, and it takes a little bit more effort. But these are the areas that you can save the most amount of money. So track your expenses and see what's possible to lower. And tip number 9 is pay yourself the difference. There's this idea called pay yourself first, which means that you should pay your own saving and investment accounts before paying other people. Now, most of the money that we work for goes to other people. We pay other people. We pay our rent. We pay our groceries. We pay for our car. But we also need to pay ourselves a little bit, because if you don't do that, then your savings will never grow. So you need to set out a specific amount of money. So after tracking your expenses, decide how much money can you afford to pay yourself and put that money in a savings account, which leads me to tip number 10, and that's separate the money. Now, whenever you decide how much money that you can afford to put away and pay yourself first every single week, you need to separate the money. And banks have different accounts for different reasons. There's checking account, there's saving, and then there's investments account. And you need to put the money in the designated spot so you know what money is doing what. Savings account could be for emergencies, investment account for growing money, and checking just for spending. And when you separate the money, you know what the purpose of money is, because if you don't do that, then you might accidentally spend the money. And tip number 11 is use that money to make more money. Like I said in the beginning of this video, income is not based on how hard you work. I actually think in this world, the harder you work, the less you get paid. Income is based on the type of work you do and the industry you're in. If you're in an industry like service, there's a limit to how much you can make regardless of what position that you're in. So you should use your savings to do something to invest in yourself, to try to find ways to get out of the low income environment, and then saving will become a lot easier. With that, thank you so much for watching. My name is Austin. Que tenga un buen día. Nos vemos. Yo soy Agustín de los Montañas en Colorado Springs. Nos vemos.